If we understand our own death, we can easily accept our failures and embrace our own rejections because everything is lighter. Kasi alam natin na one day matatapos din to lahat. Welcome to Small Talk, small conversations with huge impact. My name is Alec and I'm your host for today. And before we go on with the topic, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining me today in this episode kasi I have seen a lot of people investing in themselves, in self-help, self-improvement, self-education, and you clicking on this podcast, that means that you're one of those people and you're choosing this podcast as a vehicle for you to grow as an individual and as a person. So thank you so much for choosing this podcast. And I hope that you are safe. I hope that you have enough food and resources to get by these crazy times. I hope na your family is safe and your friends and your loved ones is safe as well. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so. Click the subscribe or follow button. Also, if you haven't gave this podcast a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, please do so. It immensely helps the podcast to grow its reach. And I really appreciate the people who are tagging me on their IG stories. It hugely boosts the reach of our podcast. So thank you so much. And sobrang dali rin makipag-interact sa mga tao through the IG story. So if you're listening right now, please share this on your IG stories. Let people know that you're listening to the podcast and you're investing in yourself and you're learning something today, diba? Lastly, the design of the merch is almost done. Medyo na-push back lang tayo sa mga deadlines natin dahil sa COVID-19. Pero as soon as the quarantine is over, I will be releasing the merch. So please tune in for that and, abangan nyo yan. Okay, so for today, we are going to talk about death. And as you may have seen from the title, I am here to tell you one thing. I am here to remind you one thing only. And that is, you are going to die. And some of you actually get that concept na naiintindihan nila na mamatay sila and they're living their best life. They're living their life to the fullest because they get it. They get na mamamatay sila. And if you're one of those people, then I'm happy for you. Great for you, right? You can skip this episode if you want. If you could, listen to another episode or listen to another podcast if you want. But if you're not one of those people, if you felt anxious, if you felt scared, if you felt uncomfortable, if you felt offended nung sinabi ko sa'yo na you are going to die, then please stay. Stay until the end of the podcast because I want to change your perspective about death. Because for me, for the most people who are listening here, you're not actually scared of death. You're scared of the possibility of having a life not well lived. You're not scared of dying. You're just scared of the possibility that you have not lived a successful and happy life. And that's what most people are scared of. And I want to share 3 concepts relating to death that I've learned these past 2 weeks to hopefully give you a new perspective about it. I've learned these concepts nung nagre-reflect ako sa Botolan, Zambales because as some of you may know, I was on a little retreat to Botolan, Zambales because I lost my grandmother 2 weeks ago and that's where she wanted her wake to be held and that's also the place where she wanted to be buried. So we went there, amidst this crisis, amidst this COVID-19 crisis. We went there and for 5 days, I just kept on thinking. I just kept on reflecting on what her death means to me, to the people I love, to the people around me. And I've learned these 3 major concepts. I learned a lot of lessons, but itong 3 lessons na natutunan ko is what I want to share with you because I think that this 3 is the most personal and the most universal as well. And the first being, life is so fragile. And I learned this concept on the day of her death, I received a phone call from my brother and he told me na pumunta na kayo dito sa bahay, miyak siya. And so I rode the motorcycle for the first time dito sa Olongapo. And I went there. And pagdating doon, everyone was crying already. Everyone was sad already. And nakita ko na sini-CPR na nila si nanay. And I was broken. I was completely devastated nung nakita ko yun because I never thought that I would see the image of her gasping for her last breath. I think that you can't fully grasp the concept of death until you see someone gasping for her last breath. And they were trying to CPR her and her pulse came back for a few moments and then nawawala and then CPR again and then eventually my tita said na wag na pagpahingahin na natin. So they stopped resuscitating her. And that scene was so vivid. That scene, I'll probably remember that for the rest of my life because that's the first time I saw someone. Sobrang sakit na nga na fact na kapamilya mo yun. That's one of the people that I love the most. And she was literally gasping for her last breath. And they had this thing na nakakonect dun sa daliri niya and nagbibigay, para siyang yung sa hospital, yung nagbibigay ng beep, kung ano man tawag doon, nag-monitor ng heart rate, ng pulse ng tao. Meron nakadikit dun sa finger niya and tumutunog yun pag meron. And then, nung narinig ko yung last beep, then wala nang sumunod. That's the moment I realized na wala na. Nawala siya, that she passed away. And that scene was one of the most defining moments in my life because I was struck. I was stricken by how fragile life was, how easy it was for a person to be gone, how we are nothing but this brittle, fragile, living things na we could easily die. Na sobrang dali nating mawalan ng buhay, sobrang dali natin mawalan ng hininga, mawalan ng pulse, mawalan ng heartbeat, mawalan ng buhay. Sobrang dali natin mawalan ng buhay. And then, they cleaned her up and dinamitan nila. And then, sinabi na we should say our last goodbyes to her. So we did. And isa-isa kaming lumapit sa kanya and we held her hand and we said our goodbyes. And then, nung ako na, lumapit ako and I held her hand. And nung paghawak ko, I just knew that the body that I was holding was dead, wasn't alive anymore. It wasn't creepy at all. It was stunning. Kasi I'm holding the hand of a person that I love and there was nothing but, bones, flesh, just water, blood that I was holding. She wasn't her anymore because she passed away. And diba, the nanay that I knew wasn't there anymore. It was just a body. And at that moment, I realized that death is real. Death is actually real. And I learned that it was inevitable for nanay and therefore it is inevitable for everyone, including me, especially me. And only when we accept our own death can we truly understand how to live. And at that moment, I acknowledged that death is real. And that's the first step of accepting our own death, accepting the death of the people around us. And nawakan ko yun, doon ko naintindihan na, okay, mamatay tayong lahat. Mamatay ako, mamatay siya, mamatay tayong lahat. And when we are able to accept our death, when we are able to understand their fragility, every struggle will become so much easier. Everything will become easier. Gumaan na lang lahat eh. Parang every little trivial things na wino-worry natin sa buhay natin, nawala na yun. It was, sent out of the door nung nakita ko na death is real. Lahat ng iniisip ko about my school, the podcast, my relationship problems, lahat ng ibang problema ko financially, spiritually, mentally, romantically, lahat ng problema ko nawala. Kasi I realized na it's not that important. One day we will die. I will die. And 90% of what I was worrying about shouldn't be bothering me at all. Kasi if I try to look at the bigger picture, it won't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's just these things that are trying to get us occupied until we, reach our final destination. But most of the things that we are worrying about are nonsense, are pointless things, are useless drama, useless stress na hindi naman natin kailangan talaga. And that's the point. When we understand our death, when we understand our fragility, we can easily manage through the different struggles that we are having. It's easier for us to untangle our addictions. We can easily identify and acknowledge our entitlement in life. We could see that most of the things that we have are being taken for granted, right? We can accept responsibility for our own problems. It becomes easier for us to suffer through our fears, our doubts, or our uncertainties, right? If we understand our own death, we can easily accept our failures and embrace our own rejections because everything is lighter. Kasi alam natin one day matatapos din 'to lahat. And I'm not saying this na parang sige, wala na pala akong problemahin. No. Death is inevitable. But 90% of the things that we are worrying about is just pointless shit. And the moment you know that death is real, you can easily realign your values. Kung ano talaga yung mahalaga sa'yo at kung ano yung hindi. Ayusin mo yung priorities mo sa buhay. That's what happened to me. Nakita ko na wala palang meaning to mga iniiyak-iyak ko for the past few weeks, yung stress ko, itong ganyan. Kasi mamatay din tayo lahat. It became lighter, in a sense. Nagets ba? That's the first concept, that death was real. Life is fragile. That's the first concept. And the second concept that I've learned is sense of urgency. There was a time during her wake. It was the first night of her wake. I was sitting on a chair and I was looking forward. My father was looking down on her mother. And as I looked back, I saw people who were looking at me. Right? And I was looking at my father and my father was looking at her mother. And her mother was lying on a coffin. And doon ako na-hit, doon ko naramdaman na cycle lang yan. Na one day, ako naman yung nasa posisyon ni Papa, si Papa naman yung nasa posisyon ni Nanay. And yung mga tao nakatingin sa akin, sila naman yung nakatingin sa akin habang nakatayo ako. And magpapalit-palit lang posisyon, but it's a cycle. It's a continuous cycle na hindi natin maiiwasan. And when I saw that, when I saw that scene, when I saw that frame in my mind, doon ko naintindihan na wala na pala akong dapat sayangin na oras. Kasi when we understand that death is real, the only question that we have to ask is when are we going to die, right? So if we know that we are going to die, the only question we have is when are we going to die pala? And we'll never know. And I'm not saying that you'll die today or you'll die tomorrow or the next week or the next month, but you will die. If there's one thing that we can hold on to this life, it's the uncertainty. We can never really tell that you last 10 more years, 15 more years, 20 more years. And regardless if you do, if we don't have the sense of urgency para ayusin yung buhay natin, edi masasayang lang lahat yun. Kaya nung ako nakita ko na kailangan ko nang ayusin yung buhay ko. Kailangan ko nang gawin yung mga bagay na magpapasaya sa akin. Kailangan ko nang pasayahin yung mga tao sa paligid ko. Kailangan ko nang magbigay ng value sa mga tao na mahal ko. Kasi one day sila na nakahiga. And I cannot risk having regrets pag nangyari yun. So as much as possible, I felt the urgency na I tried to formulate how could I be in a state where I could show love, when I could show love to myself and I could show love to the people around me. I had this urgency na wala na akong dapat sayangin kasi mabilis na lang to. Kahit na years or months pa yan, mabilis na lang to. And if you don't get the feeling of urgency. It's okay. But I want you to do this exercise. I want you to imagine that the person that you love the most will be lying on a coffin tomorrow. And when you do that, ask yourself, are you going to love her 100%? Are you going to have regrets? Are you going to say thank you? Are you going to say regrets when it happens? And I don't want you to have regrets. So I want you to say what you mean, show her love, show him love. Wala kayong sasayangin na oras. I know it's crazy na you're imagining someone's death. Pero when we understand that death is real, that happens so quickly, mararamdaman natin na sobrang limited ng time natin and hindi natin iti-take for granted yung oras na nandito tayo ngayon sa lupa. And you could also imagine that you're the one lying in your coffin. And that's the third concept that I've learned this past few days. That nothing matters except your legacy. And because of the COVID-19, medyo stressful yung naging wake and libing ni nanay. Konti lang yung taong pumunta. Well, almost walang taong pumunta kasi nga everyone was advised to stay at home and avoid these mass gatherings. And I really understand safety first. But it was sad to see na walang bumibisita kay nanay. Although she lived 82 years, pero knowing na sobrang dami niya nakasalumuha, sobrang dami niya na impact na tao, pero walang pumunta sa kanya. Now, at first, I was so frustrated. I was mad. I was sad na, ano ba yan? Ang lungkot naman na walang pumupunta sa kanya. And then, on her last night, we held like a small program and everyone was saying their eulogies. All of the apo were saying their eulogies. And when almost everyone was finished, I realized that nanay didn't care if she didn't have any visitors sa wake niya, sa kanyang lamay. Nanay would be so happy na makita na halos lahat ng mga apo niya ay nandun. And they were paying their respect and they were showing love. They were telling people these stories of how she impacted her grandchildren. And doon nawala yung inis ko na walang pumunta, na wala yung inis ko na walang bumisita man lang sa kanya. Kasi naintindihan ko na that's her legacy. That was what she wanted to be remembered about. Yun yung legacy na gusto niyang iniiwan sa mundong to. Na siya yung lola na sobrang mapagmahal sa kanyang mga apo. And nung nakita ko yun, naintindihan ko na nanay would be so happy because her legacy was fulfilled. She wanted to be the person who showed love when she could, and she did just that. And it didn't matter kung walang pumunta or walang bumisita sa kanya. Her legacy was fulfilled. And that's what I want you to ask yourself right now. Knowing that death is real, knowing that death will happen soon, you ask yourself now, what legacy do you want to leave behind in this world? Do you want to leave this world in a better place? What impact do you want to have in this world? How would you like yourself to be remembered? And ayun nga, sabi ko nga na, imagine yourself lying on a coffin. What eulogies, what stories do you want to hear from the people that you love, from the people around you? Once you know that, you can act accordingly. You can envision, when you do that, you can see kung ano talaga yung mahalaga sa'yo, kung ano talaga yung pinapriority mo dito sa mundo. And when you know what impact you want to have in this world, mas madali lang gumawa ng plano eh. Mas madali lang bigyan ng direction yung buhay mo. And from that, you can create action plans on how you could achieve your goals, on how you could live that life, on how you could create that legacy for you, for the next generation, and for the people around you. That's the third thing. Ask yourself, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Kasi, nakita ko yung kay nanay, although at first it seemed it was sad, it was frustrating to see na walang bumibisita, nakita ko na she was gonna be so happy to see na halos lahat ng apo niya nandun. Kasi that's the legacy that she wanted to have. And she had just that. And I want all of us to feel that same way again. I don't want us on our deathbeds with many regrets in life. I want us to have the legacy that we want to have. So think about that, right? Death is real. Life is fragile. Death will come soon. We need to have a sense of urgency. What are we going to do about it? What legacy do we want to leave behind? That's the 3 points that I want to share with you today. And there was a scene siguro after naming libing. I went to the beach and umupo ako doon. And nakita ko kung gaano kalaki yung dagat. Kung gaano kalaki yung sky. And for a moment, all was there was me and the sea, the beach. Yung hangin, yung buhangin, yung sky, yung tubig. Nothing was in between. And I thought na kung mawala man ako, it wouldn't mean anything. Wala magbabago. The sun will still rise. The sun will still set. The waves will still crash. And nothing would change kung wala ako dito sa mundong to. Pero I realized na tangina, kahit ganun, andito ako. Kahit I didn't mean so much to the world, andito ako. I have been given a chance to live this life. And there is a very small chance that you could live the life that you're living. So if you're listening to this podcast, that means you're one of the very, very few people that are lucky enough to be alive. Because a lot of people aren't alive anymore. And you are lucky. And that's what I want you to remember as well. That you could be the one lying on a coffin, but you're not. You're alive and act like you're alive. And if there's one thing that you could take away from this episode, I want it to be this. I want you to be able to say that you are going to die, but first you are going to fully live. And I want you to do just that. I want you to live a life well lived. And that's all I have for you for this episode. I hope that you learned something. I hope that this somehow gave you a new perception about death and life. And it might have been messy, but we're all figuring things out together, as we go in this journey of life. And I hope that these lessons, the stories that I shared with you, will have an impact on how you could see things that will happen in your life. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to me, getting to this point, reaching to the end of this episode. I really appreciate that you are still here, still listening. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sana may natutunan kayo. Sana kahit pa paano nabigyan ko kayo ng bagong perspective sa buhay. So that's all I have for you today. And if you like this episode, please go share it on your IG stories. If you like this, if you've connected with any of the things that I've said, then please go share it on your IG stories. Quote me or tag me at AWF Cuenca or at Small Talk Podcasts. That's the official Instagram page for the podcast. I hope that you share this with the people that you care about and the people you love as well. And yun lang. I hope that you have a nice week. Tentatively, there's 2 weeks left in this quarantine. So let's make this quarantine season worth it. See you again next week for another episode. Or maybe this week, kung medyo nasipagan ako mag-upload na naman. Yun lang. I hope that you're safe. Talk to you next week. Peace.